So Francis Fukuyama is not, or maybe it's not a name that will resonate in the general public, but every intellectual, every decent politician, every student of philosophy or law or political sciences should know that that is the name of one of the most influential thinkers of contemporary political science and in philosophy. Mr. Fukuyama, as we speak, not so far away, there is a big conflict in Ukraine. My first question would be connected with the war in Ukraine. What is your opinion? What is your view on the invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the consequences by this step?
I think that the war was really started by one man, Vladimir Putin, and the objective is one that he's laid out in an article he published last summer and the speech that he gave before the war began, which makes it clear that it's about much more than just Ukraine. People have talked about his fear of Ukrainian NATO membership, but I think that really what is in his mind is the entire legacy of the period after the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991 and all of the different countries in Eastern Europe and in the former Soviet Union became independent sovereign nations. And he thinks that that was a big tragedy, especially the breakup of the USSR itself. And I think he wants to put back together as much of that as he can. And so Ukraine, in a way, is just the starting point. It's the most important building block. But his ambitions, I don't think, are going to simply end there.
So your prediction is that the war will spread beyond the borders of Ukraine?
Well, no, I think that depends on the outcome of the fighting that's going on right now. I think that Putin has made a huge mistake. He thought that he would be greeted as a liberator, that the Ukrainian army would collapse very quickly, that Ukrainians would come over to his side and the war would be over in 48 hours. And instead, he's gotten bogged down outside of Kyiv. He really doesn't have the force to control a country of 40 million people who are now highly unified, very angry, and want to resist him to the end. So I don't think he's going to accomplish certainly this larger goal, but in the meantime, he's going to do a tremendous amount of damage to Ukraine itself. He's going to destroy the physical infrastructure, and he's going to kill a lot of people.
I don't want to draw you into comparisons, but it's a fact that the invasion of Ukraine by Russia is not the only invasion of a foreign or an independent country in the past 2 or 3 decades. But now the condemnation towards the invader is much more stronger, unified, even unprecedented. Why?
I think that, first of all, the act itself was so shocking. Europeans and Americans have not seen this kind of war, close up, really since 1945. There was the war in Yugoslavia in the 1990s, but in a sense, this is a much bigger event, and I think it's disturbed the kind of complacency that they have felt about their peace and security. And so that's part of it. I think part of it is also good diplomacy. I think there is a big effort on the part of the Biden administration to make sure that the alliance, the NATO alliance, could speak with one voice. There's a lot of behind-the-scenes efforts to get Germany to change its posture. And that's probably the most remarkable thing that's come out of this conflict is the change in German foreign policy. They had been at one point the biggest friend of Russia within the NATO alliance, and now they've announced a doubling of their defense budget, willingness to transfer weapons to Ukraine, and really the turnaround in a 40-year period of German foreign policy.
Are we maybe seeing the starting maybe of, or the beginnings of maybe new world order or something that would look like at least a new ideological division in the world?
It's a division, but it's less clear-cut than during the Cold War because you don't have two competing ideologies. You do have liberal democracy and a set of shared values in the West, But, the opponents are a heterogeneous group. Some are on the right, some are on the left. The only thing they have in common is that they don't like, the idea of a liberal democracy. So China and Venezuela don't really have very much in common. The two of them don't have much in common with Turkey, but they're all working together in certain ways. So it's different from the Cold War in that there's not a systematic ideology that's opposing democracy, rather a series of powers that find their own national interests at odds with that of the West.
This one question is also a bit theoretical. Your position is that the liberal democracy is best in resolving the major contradictions in a society. Why it didn't succeed, or at least it didn't succeed yet in Russia and some other places?
Well, there's a lot of historical legacies that I think get in the way of creating a liberal society. There are these centralizing political traditions in Russia. They have not experienced genuine democracy for much of their history, I think that's important. It's frankly been hard to really have liberal democracy in the Balkans because identity politics is so powerful here. In a liberal democracy, you have this aspiration to treat people as individuals and not as members of identity groups. But I think that way of thinking is very deeply embedded in this part of the world, and therefore it's very hard to create national identities that are more inclusive. And so all of these are reasons why liberal democracy doesn't work that well in certain parts of the world.
North Macedonia is a country with a large diaspora that almost exclusively lives in the West. But then it comes as a paradox that a reasonable or a big enough group of people here are supportive towards the Putin actions in Ukraine, towards a obvious autocratic system. So how is it possible to strive to live in a capitalistic liberal society and have sympathy towards somebody who is so autocratic?
I think part of that is a kind of illusion. I mean, the fact that people aren't trying to get out of North Macedonia and move to Moscow kind of indicates that on some level they realize that this is not a superior kind of society where they would really prefer to live. They go to Berlin or to London or to other places. And that, I think, kind of indicates that what they're doing is projecting, certain hopes and fears on these different countries that don't really reflect reality. They're more postures so that if you support Putin, you're taking a certain stand, within your own society. But it doesn't actually translate into, a preference for a certain way of life.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Fukuyama.
Thank you very much.